All right, guys, what is going on? I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's jump into another awesome build here in Byerly Studios. So, I have an awesome kind of friend on TikTok. He's up in Canada. He's making amazing metalwork into awesome robots. So, he's kind of taking scrap metal, scrap tin, and things like that and turning it into awesome robots. So we're going to make a commission for him here. It's going to be absolutely incredible, and I'm going to put all my heart into it. So we're going to start off with a piece of just board here that I had bought at the hobby store. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of wrap tin foil around it so that what I'm about to build, which is the main base for the sculpture tumbler, does not stick to it yet. And then that will allow me to remove that aluminum foil and the base that I build and bake it separately later. So we're just going to go ahead and separate off some clay here. I used about 2 pounds, probably about 1.5 pounds really. And I'm just taking that and kind of blocking it in. The goal of this is just to have barely a little bit of an overhang, and I want this to look like not rock per se, but just broken up, cracked concrete. Very dingy. I want it to look like a shop floor because Mad Mike does work in a metalworking shop, and he does welding and metalworking, grinding, and things like that. So he has a concrete floor, and that's kind of what I want to simulate. I want to simulate that rough texture, industrial look, and throughout the build, you'll kind of see a lot of the grunge, a lot of the industrial part of this come through. So once I get that base layer put on there, we can start to shape it from there. I'm kind of like pushing it out in a way so it hangs over the edge of the wood a little bit, and then I'll kind of take pieces away from the wood and make a little overhang, kind of like that concrete just has a projected piece of it like a cliff. Then I'll kind of texture that as I go along through the process. I texture pretty early on, that way I can just get an idea of how the overall shape of the structure is going to kind of be. I want it to have a few divots because I want to have some oil spots in the concrete, kind of like this, like the oil's divoting in those little holes, and it's kind of settled in. It's not really been able to wash out and things. So I want to have a little bit of oil dips in it, and then we're going to also add some cracks along the process. So right now we're just kind of texturing it. I kind of went off camera a little bit there, but it'll jump back in frame in just a moment. So you can kind of see here where I had already cut or partially cut a circular port in the concrete. Now this is going to be a pretty much flat surface where I can set the actual sculpted tumbler that I'm going to build on top of the floor. So it kind of has a little nook that the main portion of the bottom of that tumbler will sit down into. It's not going to be super deep like some of the other ones that I've done, but it's just going to be something there, right? I might put a piece of carpet there just to make it kind of blend out pretty good, and then I'll just I just want it to be like just a circular place, like, hey, this is where this sits, for it to be like the way that I designed it, right? And I'll kind of push the existing tumbler, and I know it's a 30-ounce skinny, down into the clay to kind of uniform it, kind of level it out on its own, and then I'll just kind of take a little bit extra away from that exterior circle so that it has some wiggle room there. Kind of shave that as smooth as I can get it. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. Like I said, I might put a piece of carpet there so that way it doesn't have any epoxy adhesion, just because of the tackiness that epoxy can sometimes have against itself. So with the concrete kind of blocked in for most part how I want it, I do want to incorporate different mediums. So we got rock, concrete, and then I'm going to put some oil in there, some grunge and grunginess. The next stage is I want to have a metal plate. Originally, I was thinking about like maybe like a diamond plate or something like that, and I decided to go with just a piece of rusted steel, a flat piece of rusted steel. So what I originally was going to do, I was going to hand flatten that out. I don't have a lasagna press or anything fancy like that, but and then I decided to roll it out into a kind of a log and then stretch it out with the actual tumbler itself as a rolling pin. So you can kind of see I've measured it. I think this was about 6 or 7 inches wide, or about 7.5 to 8 inches from outside corner to outside corner. And then I measured it the width that I want. And this doesn't have to be super thick. It needs to be pretty thin overall. Otherwise, it just won't feel realistic. in any way, right? So I wanted to keep it kind of thin. I'm measuring it a few times before I really kind of just run with it, score it, and then I kind of roll it out a few times, right? Just kind of extending those corners out because a lot of that will be cut away. And then I finally just buck up the nerve and I go ahead and measure it off and I cut it. And what I have is what I have. All right, so here I'm making the very first cut. Now that is angled, the top of the blade is angled away from the sculpted piece, so that way the bottom of the metal is kind of pinched inward a little bit. I want it to have that angle right there, just so that when I ripple the metal, it wouldn't have just a straight edge. I want it to be angled a little bit. So I'm just kind of scoring it so that I can kind of just get the general shape that I want before I kind of angle the sides there all the way across. Now I'm just going to kind of cut away a little bit at a time until I get the desired effect. There I'm removing a little bit for the other side, and then I'll try to form fit it again. See, I like the kind of overall shape there. It's getting the general shape along the edges that I want, and then I'm going to kind of mark off and see the score where I'd like for the actual edges of it to be. Now the first edge here does go across that circular cutout that I had for the tumbler base. That's okay. We're going to also make a cutout for around the tumbler also, but we'll get to that in a few moments. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out those two side pieces there. I was going to use an X-Acto knife, but then I thought better of it. I didn't want to cut up my parchment paper there when I'm still using it. I'm probably going to use that to bake as well, so I decided not to cut that up. Cut off the second side over here. Pretty good. I'm just kind of skinning off a little bit of that extra overhang. Sometimes it doesn't give a completely clean cut, and I just shaved a little bit of that off. It really doesn't matter, honestly, because I'm going to add a lot of rust texture to it, so all of this really doesn't matter at all. But so then I decided to go ahead and I wanted to add some jaggedness to the exterior. Now you got to remember that I'm going to be baking this metal plate separate so that it bakes as a flat surface, whereas the concrete is not, right? So if I bake that clay on the base, it would probably kind of sink in from the heat. It would expand or contract, and it wouldn't be completely flat. I want it to be flat all the way across to give a difference in variation, and also give a shadow underneath the metal plate where the concrete doesn't buck up against the bottom of the metal. Here I am, I've already cut away some of the exterior edges, made it a little bit jagged, and now I scored it. It's hard to see on the camera, but I scored it with the bottom of the tumbler, and I'm going to cut that away the same way. With an X-Acto knife, cut that away, and then peel that back, and then we'll form fit that again. So it kind of wraps around the bottom of the tumbler. So with that, kind of how I like it, we're going to go ahead and begin adding some rust ripple texture along the exterior of the metal. I use a multitude of tools here. I use a flat blade, a curved blade. I also use a dimpling or a ball tool, a few different things. So just to get the desired effect, I've rippled the metal in like the corners where you know it's peeled up maybe, or it's bent, or maybe something broke off. Maybe the rust was just too thin there and it just couldn't take the pressure. So I'm putting pressure with my finger as I bend some of that up. Other places I give it just vertical cuts like this, where maybe it was a grinder or something and it didn't give it a clean shaved edge, like a bandsaw, and it left marks in it. And then when I come back in with color later on in the second portion of this video, it really kind of brings those corners to life, because everything that I'm adding, it allows the washes to really to get down deep in those joints before we're going over it with silver for the second coat, which really brings out all of those dark details. It does have quite a bit of shine to it. I do use a pure silver on this, so it looks really fantastic when I get it all done. And with it contrasts against the gray base, you can just really see it. There I am, just actually slamming the dimpling or the ball tool down, and it's just applying some dents to it. Just very rustic. Kind of roll around the edges there just to kind of give it some rippling effect. Like it, you know, wasn't completely flat. Now the bottom is flat, just remember that. So although I am texturing the top of it, the bottom portion is pretty flat. All right, so this is the last time that I kind of form fit it before I lay it flat on the baking pan and I get ready to bake the thing. So, like I said, I want that to be a flat piece of metal. The concrete's not. So we're going to bake that separate, and then we're going to form fit it to the actual concrete base. So I'm just adding a few more details here and there, and then there I am actually removing it and putting it on the bake pan. I baked this for around, I think it was like 15 minutes or so at 275. So while that's baking, I went ahead and applied some cracks. I did these in various shapes. Some of them are just as simple as the X-Acto knife, really thin, very minute and not noticeable. Some of them, which look actually quite better, are the larger cracks. Now these do get washed out quite a bit because I do come in with a black base coat to blend those in, and then they kind of get washed out over time. But that's just how concrete is, right? Some cracks are more noticeable than others. Some of them are just faded away. Some you can't tell at all are there, or some get filled in by dirt, and grime throughout, the history of the lifespan of the concrete, right? So I'm just kind of just breaking up the monotony of just a flat surface and just adding cracks here and there. All right, so here I am just removing a little bit of the meat along the exterior edges, mainly on the front and the back. The sides are just they're kind of just rolling over a little bit, so they're a little bit thinner. But that front portion where it would be sitting and it'd be facing you, I want it to have more of a jagged surface. So by taking away more of that, it creates more of an extended shelf to the surface, and it just gives me a lot of shadow between the surface and the actual base wood itself. All right, so here I am just kind of form fitting it for the last time before I actually bake the base in the concrete itself. So what I wanted to do is, of course, it's a flat piece of metal, and I wanted to kind of build it up so that it's a little bit of an overhang and there's shadow underneath it, because like the concrete's uneven, right? So I want that plate to be as flat as I can. So I went ahead and built up just a little bit of material and then pushed that plate down to flatten it out. All right, so this is the last time I kind of fit the 30-ounce skinny. I almost said 3D tumbler, 30-ounce skinny to the base itself before baking. And this is kind of the finished product. I know a lot of the details aren't really showing through yet because it's all bleached and white, clay, but it really comes out pretty good. So here I'm starting the paint process. All right, so this is me beginning the painting process. Now, I use a variety of paints and washes and inks. I've really started to like using the inks. No particular brand. They're just really watered down, really nice pigmented colors, and they're really good for the airbrush. So I wanted to use the airbrush for the base just because I have such varying surfaces, a lot of cracks, a lot of crevices, and I wanted this Mars Black mixture that I made to go ahead and just sink down into those crevices and those divots that I left specifically for like an oil texture. So enjoy the process as I kind of just build out the base, and now as you can see, I'm already moving into some darker browns, a burnt sienna mixture. As I continue with the Mars Black, I'm adding the burnt sienna, and it's going to bring up the brown tones. And then as I finish with the brown tones, I'm going to add a little bit of red brick and bring out some rust colors in those areas where I want rust to be. And then I'll continue on, and eventually I'll get to a point where I'll start to bring in a gray dry brush and then work up the gray texture before I roll into some more rust and dirt grime. So sit back and enjoy the process, and I'll kind of talk along the way. All right, so this is just me introducing more and more of that burnt umber, and eventually the Mars Black just completely gets washed out of my paint cup right there, and eventually I'm just spraying just a pure burnt umber brown on top of that and letting it sink into those crevices. All right, so as we finish up with the burnt umber here, we're going to roll into the red brick. What a spectacular color this is. Now, this red brick is fantastic, and although I haven't really used it much, it is great. Look how bright that red is, and even if I'm not making particular bricks itself, it's still good to introduce that into the base layers just to vary the color. It'll get washed out a little bit, and as it dries right there, you can see it kind of lowers the tone quite a bit as that liquid evaporates out of that pigment. It looks really great, and it's giving a lot of variation. I really kind of sprayed it specifically where that metal plate is going to be so that it would potentially leave a metal rust color behind, and that looks pretty good. But don't forget that rust area is not done. It's going to have a lot more grunge and nastiness to it, so that way it's kind of dripping out. I did introduce a little bit of Mars Black by brush. It really wasn't needed. I kind of wasted my time. And then I started to introduce a light layer of, now this is a Warhammer paint that I wanted to try out. It is gray uniform mixed with a little bit of white. So I'll use gray uniform and matte white, and then I will kind of introduce those in, and I'll even use those for quite a few of the dry brushing layers here in a little while as well. So just remember, as you start to see me layer in those grays here in a little while, as I bring those tones up closer and closer and closer and brighter into a concrete color, just remember that only when I reach the very, very final highlights am I using actual titanium white. Otherwise, it's Warhammer white matte. So just remember that. Sit back and really enjoy this process as we continue this. I'm just going to start to bring up the dry brushing of the grays now. And then once I get all of the grays in place, I will start to introduce more of the rust texture. See me actually using a dropper to drop in color, and I'm just letting that sink into those grooves where they need to go. Let the gravity work on those liquids, and it pulls the pigment downward. While that dries, because there's quite a bit of liquid there, I go ahead and begin on the steel plate here. Now I'm going to give this thing a complete douse Mars Black base. Now that's just a basic paint. It's a full acrylic, no washes or nothing. So that's just a basic Mars Black base, and that's going to help the silver or pure silver Winsor & Newton 2 paint. That's all I'm going to use here as far as metallics. A really good pop. It really brings out those colors. It deepens them quite a bit as opposed to just leaving it over white. It helps to bring out those metallics a lot better. So we're going to go ahead and layer that in. Now this is just the first layer of the metallics. I do 2 coats of this for the most part, kind of not so much. I let the rust do its work on the edges and on the middle a little bit, and then I just do some silver highlights after that. So I mean, just one layer of that Winsor & Newton pure silver really does the job, and it looks phenomenal. So as you can see, I always clean my brushes there. And now I'm going to go ahead and start to begin layering in a mixture of inks and acrylics. A lot of this is burnt umber and the red brick color. It's such a great rust color. I had to continue that color swatch across the entire project, and I'm going to continue to use it. That red brick is just amazingly amazing color. If I can talk, you guys, I swear. So it looks absolutely phenomenal there. I'm just going to kind of let that sink into all of those nooks and crannies that we sculpted into the edges. And I'm putting that underneath, right? So I'm layering it on quite heavy. But just remember that when I come in with the next silver layer, it really covers it, and it makes it look like the rust is coming through that silver metal. Or it's been stained for whatever reason, maybe left outside for an extended amount of time. Now I'm using some of that sepia and a little bit of Mars black there, a little bit of wash to kind of deepen where those little divots that we rolled into the clay are. So it really covers it up really nicely and adds little water rust spots. We're going to add a little bit of a silver layer over that rust like I spoke of just a second ago, and that's going to really kind of blend that rust and the stains into the metal texture. And that's what really brings that shine forward, so that when I pick the item up and show you in a few moments, and as I move it around, you're really going to see it shine under the light. And that's truly important to make it look like a realistic piece of metal. Like this thing, it looks like I literally went out to my steel pile, picked it up, and I'm just putting it on a piece of clay. It's phenomenal. All right, so let's go ahead and begin the process of starting the dry brush. Like I said before, I'm using Warhammer paints for this for the most part. Later on in the process, when I'm truly trying to get a really bright concrete, like a dry concrete look, like top coat, I do begin just using titanium white and Mars black tube paints. That's pure acrylics. But these are actually airbrush paints from Warhammer. That is uniform gray and matte white, and I'm just kind of blending those on my brush and then just layering them where I want. This is really where you're going to start to truly see the color and the texture that I sculpted into the clay come through. It's really going to start to bring the item to life, and every layer that I add on, including any dirt layers after this, will only intensify the details. So over the next few minutes, truly just sit back and enjoy the process, and just remember, like I said before, only the very top highlights are pure acrylics. Everything else is Warhammer. Enjoy, guys. So we're really looking good, guys. Now I do come back with a little bit more gray layer, but that tone is really coming up to where I want it to be. I go ahead and start to get ready to attach the actual metal plate to the structure itself now. You can really see the contrast in color is phenomenal. And then as I shift that around, that light follows those metallics. It looks really good. But we're not done yet, guys. What do you think? I'm basic? All right, so as you can see here, I'm introducing more of the rust colors. I wanted those two edges where those overhangs were coming off to have a lot of rust drip texture that's running off of the concrete. So it's just a different layers of what we've already seen before. Burnt umber, a little bit more black, a lot of sepia because I'm really darkening that compared to the rest of the concrete. And then I'm also using the actual dropper itself from the ink bottles. And I'm letting just the ink drops come off of the existing metal and they drip where they drip and they distribute where they want to. Let gravity do the work, let it be realistic in its own way because those paints are so watered down, that's how they would drip normally. They just wouldn't drip all that pigment. We're expediting that because we're adding a lot of pigment to that liquid as they dry. So it just looks really good. We're adding the color, letting it do its work, and then we're moving on. I'm even adding some to the top of the plate there. You can see where it's sitting there. That's going to dry and it's going to make it look like it's puddled up there. Very cool. So with that kind of done, I go ahead and I grab my E6000 and then we go ahead and put this in place and it is final. All right, so y'all said I was basic? Nah, no basics over here. So we're gonna go ahead and bring it up a next level, and we're gonna go ahead and add some color to the base. Not just concrete and metal. We're gonna go ahead and give it just some flair. So what do most machinist shops have? They have a cautionary area where you have to stay away, whether that be gasoline or an eye wash station. They always have this caution tape everywhere. So I didn't want to tape it because it's an uneven surface. I didn't want to do any kind of spray from the airbrush. I wanted something very lacquered. I wanted it very thick and cakey. I wanted to kind of simulate the same texture that you would get if you were looking at the center line on a road, right? That's heated up. That's heated up and it's kind of like baked onto the surface so it doesn't peel up. It's very thick and cakey, right? And that's what I want it to look like. I want it to look like it was really thickly put on so that whoever did it was in a rush. They really didn't care, but at the same time, it's there, right? And it's probably not going to come up. So I give it the last few true highlights of color here. This is pure titanium and Mars black, and I'm continuously lowering the Mars black until I get almost a pure titanium. And that's just giving it that really dry, concrete look. All right, so let's go ahead and get this stripe on this thing. So I wanted to have a continuous stripe from the front to the back, but not on the metal. I really wanted to give it some distinction. And what I did is I created a stencil with my Cricut software, and I printed them out separately, and then I applied a tape to the end so that they're uniform. So when I remove one, the other one is in the same place. We're going to go ahead and we're going to apply a base black layer to it, and then we're going to fold it over, and we're going to do the same thing with the yellow layer. And then we're going to layer those in until I get a desired effect before we age it to the rest of the concrete, right? So I go ahead and I kind of configure this. We end up coming back and doing the back part because it's a little bit longer than the front. And once I cut the stencil, it's cut, right? You can't fix it. So I go ahead and kind of measure it off the first time, and then we kind of switch things up and I move it actually to the back here. And we decide to do the back first. So I'll go ahead and I kind of get the black down, but before I do that, I need to get a straight line across so that I can continue the stencil or the tape line all the way across the actual concrete itself. So I just used a measuring tape, and you can see I have an old engine piston here on the side. That's supposed to be another craft project for the future. Oil monster! And it's going to sit off to the side. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of lay that in, and I'm just going to hold it. It doesn't have to be perfect, guys. I'm going to come in with a few different layers to kind of thicken that paint and make it look like it's kind of enameled into the concrete. Still see all that texture, right? It's still there. It's just going to be covered up by a lot of layers. And then as I finish up the back part, I kind of rotate it around. That's the good thing about having the ruler there. I can get a straight line without having to really work too hard. And then I just flip it over and use the same stencil. And I went ahead and applied another layer. I do a few layers of black here, and I use a heat gun just to kind of expedite the heating process, so that can kind of work pretty quickly. I think I did this entire process within about 15 minutes or so, all of the layers. And then I just had to wait a while for the yellow to dry. So as soon as we finish up the Mars black base, I go ahead and we're going to jump into the yellow. Now we're painting the yellow over the black. So the first layer, I honestly didn't wait long enough to begin. I was just so excited to get some yellow color on this thing that it kind of blended with the black, and it fixes it with the next layer. Just be aware that this isn't as bright as it could be. You can kind of see it blending with the black. But as we add more layers in, it kind of fixes that problem. No worries. So with the magic of editing, we're going to automatically jump to, oh, the yellow is on there. Now I am going to go ahead and apply a very, very liberal amount of paint to this, and I do come in with a finer point brush because I'm still using the filbert to apply corners to that yellow so they just look a little bit more crisp. I actually got some over paint there on the metal, and it kind of irked me a little bit. I tried to wipe it off, but I'll have to fix it later with a little bit of rust wash before I finish everything up here. I'm kind of straightening up those edges, but for the most part, that's how it is, right? The edges are pretty rough, but it's supposed to be painted, right? So now I'm using a homemade mixture of different colors, inks, and alcohol, rubbing alcohol, to give it a nice spray. Now this spray is what I begin with in the rust process, so it gives it overall everything a spray, and it settles into those divots of where my paint and brush strokes were. So I do this 2 times, and in between I hit it with the heat gun, and it just evaporates that rubbing alcohol even faster without it pulling up any of the paint, because rubbing alcohol can pull up the paint if it's not fully cured. It can reactivate it. And then I came in with the same wash as before, a liberal amount of red brick in there for a rust texture, and I just applied that very liberally around where I think that it should be. I just kind of want to break up the yellow, add some dirt, make it grimy, and make it match the rest of everything. So I want it to make it look like that plate is rusting down onto that yellow stripe. I think I achieved that pretty good. I like that you can kind of see that crack in the top left-hand corner still in the paint itself. So overall, I'm very, very satisfied with how this looks so far. All right, so you can see here I just finished up a lot of the final details with some more dirt and rust along the way, and we're going to go ahead and do the final few details. One is I went ahead and stained the wood block in a walnut and sealed it, and we're also going to print off a simple electrical hazard water slide for the metal plate. Now this is just a simple water slide, no biggie. We're going to go ahead and magically cut it out, and we're going to apply that to the metal plate, and then I'm going to rust it out. So while we're running through this last piece of rust here, I just want to thank everybody for sticking with this long video. I always say I'm going to keep them short, but I never do. I love giving y'all a lot of content that y'all can just have fun scrolling through and just enjoy the overall process. I don't hide things from you. I try not to. And I'm not saying that I don't shorten videos sometimes, but I like to give you as much as I can. So stay tuned for a lot more of this build. We still got to build him as a mad scientist or a metal worker with a welding torch and all. And then we're also going to probably give him a half-built robot that he's welding on. So sit back and enjoy these glamour shots of the base. I look forward to seeing y'all in the next video. Otherwise, subscribe, like, and I will catch you guys later. Thank you so much for your time.